Good day, my name is Michael Mulondo and I'm going to present on the subject of networking and partnership. Code is NAP0S2. The purpose of this presentation is to help you prepare for your upcoming examination and then also to give you some help and some tools. This presentation is divided into two parts. The first part is going to look at practical guides and tips that you can use as part of your preparation for the examination. And then the second part will then be the content of the subject itself, where we're going to look at different themes and subjects that you can, titles that you can actually need to know with regard to the exam itself. Now, the first part is I'm going to look at some practical guidelines that you can use. And this is just a proposal. Of course, you can make it tailor-made, something that can suit yourself. So we're going to look before the exam, and then we're also going to look that during the exam when you're going to write the examination or the exam. The first thing is that you have to know before you're going to write the exam, at least give yourself 2 months of preparation. For some people, 1 month is enough, but looking at the number of subjects that you have, you might have 3, 4, 5, 6 subjects that you have to write exam on. So preferably, I will suggest that you need to have a timetable. So then what you have to do is 3 things during these 2 months or 1 month of preparation is to read through the whole subject, the whole textbook, from chapter 1 up to the last chapter, just to understand the content and the context of the subject. The second thing is you will make notes, making notes that you can remember if there are keywords, concepts that you don't understand. And then thirdly, of course, you have to make a provision for revision. Give yourself 1 week, 2 weeks time to revise, and this is where your notes are coming in. The notes that you've been making during your preparation reading will play a very important role. And then, of course, during the examination, when you have the question paper in front of you, there are 4 things that you have to do. The first thing is you read through the whole question. The second thing is you select the question that's the easiest to answer and you start with those questions, because you might answer questions that are difficult and you might waste time. So it's very important that you have to prepare yourself when it comes to the questions. Then after you've selected the question, read through the question so that you can understand the content of the question. Very important. And then, of course, fourthly, answer the question. Don't interpret the question. Don't assume that this is the question. You have to answer the question as is. So it's very important that you have to look into this when you are going to prepare yourself for your examination. All right, we're quickly going to look through the content, and as I said also before, is don't just focus on this examination scope. It is still requested from you as a student to have a better understanding on the whole context and the content of the subject. So I will suggest that you need to read through the whole book, from chapter 1 up to the last chapter, just to have an understanding of what the subject is all about, or the module. So make it your point to read through everything and to be ready as much as possible. The first thing is we're going to look at network. Now, here you have to define what network is all about. There are different definitions about the word itself, but you have to explain in detail what does this word entail. And then also looking at the work itself. What are the functions of the network? How does network function? And when we talk about network, we're also talking about umbrella bodies, for example. We are talking about bodies that are having membership, bodies that cover other organizations or protect other or guide other organizations. Now, being an umbrella body for HIV/AIDS or any other diseases or program, it's a very important role. So there are certain terms of reference that are expected from the network. There are certain things a network is supposed to do, an umbrella body. So in your discussion discussion, you have to explain in detail what a network is, and what a network is supposed to do. How does it function? And when you are going to also look at the network, also discuss the challenges of networks. What challenges do network experience in the fulfillment of their mandate or mandate as an umbrella body? And what do they go through, the experiences they are going through? So how does a national umbrella body differ, for example, to a regional umbrella body? So write in detail and define what network is all about, and what is expected from a network to be effective in its mandate and then also in its role. So in Namibia, we've got what we call the NANASO, which is a Namibian network of 8 service organizations. We also have other umbrella bodies in the community-based management program. So we've also got other umbrellas, for example, that are doing intervention in any other development programs. So very important, define in detail what a network is and explain its role. Now, secondly, is for a network to operate, it needs to operate according to certain ground rules. There are certain rules which are specifically specified or put down or put in place for network. So in your answer and in your question, when you're going to answer this question, is you need to articulate in detail what the ground rules are from that network. And the ground rules are mostly based on the constitution of an organization, because the organizational constitution is actually its ground rules. It talks what it needs to do. And in this, you can also look at the content of this ground rule or the constitution, where you have to look at what does a network have to do to make sure that it does not go against its own rules. What does an organization, for example, do to make sure that it abides to its ground rules? What is the role of the members to make sure that this umbrella body or that this network organization is not contravening their own rules, but they're actually reinforcing their own rules? So discuss this in detail. Look at the constitution. You can look at examples of other countries, how it works. You can also look, for example, at South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, and see how did they work and how network can work. And then you can also look at the whole issue of twinning, which is a very important component of networking. Now, twinning is a concept that actually says that I want to twin with you, and what it means is I'm a strong organization, and I will take a weak organization under my wings, under my support, and then I will support them, and then to make sure that they become stronger as I am. So as a network, these are some of the things that you can also look at, how you can also help weaker organization. Then, of course, communication is very important for network. Now, imagine you are an umbrella body with a membership of, say, 2 to 300 organizations, or just make it 50 organizations. So 50 organizations are part of this network. How are you going to make sure that this network are speaking the same language, or they are on the same frequency? What will the network do to make sure that there is ongoing communication from the network to its members, and then from the members to the network? Will it be a top-down approach? Will it be a bottom-up approach? This is something that you have to look as a network in your communication plan. So a communication plan is very important, because a plan will guide you how you will communicate with your organization. Some of the member organizations are in a very far geographic location where they cannot be reached via any media or any technology, like for example internet, email. So in your communication plan, how are you going to reach out to the unreached organization, or to the organization that don't have facilities of communication? How are you going to make sure that in your whole decision-making process as a network, that you are going to involve your community organization? How are you going to reinforce your communication plan? What are you going to do for those organizations that do not have any communication infrastructure or facilities? How are you going to assess those organizations? And this is where you have to do consultation as a network, where you have to consult your members to make sure that the communication plan is not just one-sided, but it's a consultative process, or your plan was culminated out of a consultative process. So make sure that as a network that you have to have this plan. So in your answer of writing the exam, you have to then explain in detail how are you going to make sure that your communication plan is working, how you're going to implement a communication plan, for example, how are you going to make sure that everyone is on board and there is this ownership. Now communication is evolving so much that you find that even technology is having an influence on technology. So having a technology strategy would also be helpful, because a strategy looks at the practical aspect of your communication, and this is where you have to look at the current trend, the current technology. So and it needs to be incorporated within your plan or within your strategy as much as possible. Also look at the communication plan of the country. How is that linked up? How do you link up your own network communication plan with that of the national communication plan? So you need to build in. So in your discussion or in answering your question, you have to discuss this in detail to make sure why is a plan very important, how will your plan work, how will you make sure that plan will work, and how effective it is to have a communication plan. Even within the organization itself, an organization communication plan, where the network needs to play a very important role within its staff members. And this is where I talk about the secretariat. And the secretariat of the network is actually the administrative arm of the network. So how are you going to make sure, and how are you going to empower the administration arm of the network to make sure that it will implement the communication plan within the network itself? So discuss that, give practical example. You can use, for an example, any organization like NANASO as an example, where you can discuss about the communication plan. And when it comes to HIV/AIDS, issues like press release, situation reports, current event, how are you going to make sure that this communication is happening within the organization? Then, of course, as a network, you also have a very important role towards your donors, because the work that you are doing is you are doing it out of funding. So how will a network representing a membership of plus minus say 30, 50 organizations, how will you liaise with donors, and how will you make sure that some of your members, even not all of your members, are having access to donors or to donor funding? So as a network, you have a very important role to play, and this is something that you have to discuss in your exam paper. What role does network have with donors? Then resources is always a challenge, whether it's human resources, financial resources, or any other resources. So what does the network do to make sure that all your members are actually benefiting from available resources? And talking about resources is the whole thing about proposal writing as part of your fundraising. How are you going to make sure? How are you going to do fundraising? How are you going to raise fund? And then, of course, it's not just fundraising, it's also about the sustainability, long-term sustainability of funding. So what is the network going to do if the funding or the resources are depleted? Will the network have an alternative exit strategy or a plan? What will they do to make sure that funding or resources are always available? And this is where the network needs to have discussion with donors before the life cycle of the project or the funding process or the funding project. So discuss with your donor, and this is where the network can have a discussion with donors to look in detail is how to make sure that the resources are always available. And you will find that most of the donors, when they give funding to network, is they will look more at capacity building of its members than looking at overhead costs, for example, like salary and so on. So it's very important that as a network, you have to look at your donor support. You have to look at the sustainability plan of resources, and you need to have a sustainability plan also in place to make sure that this donor funding or these resources are actually sustained. Because of corruption and appropriation of funding and money laundering and so on, the list goes on, that many donors have become very skeptic, especially in supporting networks. So normally they will ask you to put in what they call a risk mitigation plan or a risk plan, management plan, just to make sure is that when the network find itself in a financial dilemma or a financial problem, how will this network rescue itself? It needs to come with a sustainability plan. It needs to come with all of these things in place so that they can make sure that money and resources are always available for its member as much as possible. Then, of course, the governing body. Now, remember, a network, it's a member-based organization. It is an organization that are consisting of members. And the governing body or the governing council of this network consists of a representative of this member organization. And the size of the governing body will then be determined by the ground rules or the constitution of the network itself. Now, your governing body plays a very important role, especially when it comes to accountability and transparency and then also ownership. So a governing body needs to play a very important role. Now, in your discussion or in your exam, you have to discuss in detail what role does a governing body play within the network. How does the governing body ensure that there is transparency within the organization or within the network itself? And then, of course, you can also discuss the characteristic of good governance. You can bring in the principle of good governance vis-a-vis the bad governance where you have corruption and all of these things. So make it a very important thing, and all of, as I say, this is all discussed within the ground rules. Now you also find another challenge, what we call the founding syndrome or the founder syndrome, where you have the founder that founded this network is for the rest of his life in charge and does not want to give chance to other body. Now, in your constitution, you have to give a very clear detail on the composition of your governing body, on the size of your governing body, the term of serving on the governing body, and then, of course, the election or the recruitment of your governing council within the governing body. So this is something that you have to discuss in the exam. Then the other thing is decision making, which is also linked to the governing council and in general is whenever decision is being made, is, as I say, is it one-sided? Is it biased? Is the network biased in its decision-making process? Or is the process of decision-making open, transparent? So this is something that you also need to discuss on the decision making. How are the network members actually involved when it comes to decision making? Or is the governing council making their own decision without consultation with its members? So broader consultation needs to be encouraged. In your paper, discuss define decision making. Secondly, look at the process of decision making. And thirdly, looking at the characteristic of decision making when it comes to good governance and so on. So a network does play a very important role within the organization or within the community itself. And as I say at the end, it is the member that are having ownership on the community, on the network. It's not the governing council, it's not the administrative arm of the network, but it's the members that are the owners of this network. Because remember, what you want to do is you want to have a net that actually work much more effectively. You want to have a system in place that works very effectively among its members. And this is where decision making comes a very important aspect of any network, so that there can be transparency. Then the last one that you can look at is the network and HIV/AIDS program. And as I made reference earlier, the network for AIDS service organization that we have here, NANASO, which is the Namibian Network of AIDS Service Organization, is one of the umbrella body that you have that can actually address HIV/AIDS network. You also have another network for the private sector, which is HealthWorks. It focuses more on private sector. They used to be known as NAP0S, the Namibian Business Coalition, but they are now actually HealthWorks. So you can also look into their constitution, into the ground rules, and also how they operate as an umbrella body or as a network among private sectors. So it's very important that you have to look into this and to make sure that you will be ready when the exam comes. So thank you for listening and watching me. I hope that this presentation helped you in your preparation for the exam, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.